This is Kilmar Abrego Garcia, an undocumented immigrant who had been living illegally in the United States since 2012. According to the DOJ, he was arrested in 2019 alongside two known active members of MS-13. Both an immigration court and an immigration appellate board found that Kilmar Abrego Garcia was a member of MS-13. Yet he was allowed to stay in the United States for several more years, because of course he was. He was put in withholding of removal status, which means that he should and would be deported, just not to El Salvador. This is because Abrego Garcia and his lawyers argued that he was afraid for his well-being because of the gangs that were supposedly going to target him. But nearly 6 years later, on March 15, 2025, the Trump administration deported Abrego Garcia to El Salvador anyway. U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement officials admitted in a court filing to an administrative error in deporting him.
A Maryland man was sent to the notorious El Salvadorian mega prison, all because of administrative error.
A Maryland man thought to be wrongly deported.
A mistakenly deported Maryland man, Kilmar Abrego Garcia.
A Maryland man wrongfully deported.
Maryland man thought to be wrongly deported.
A Maryland man who was mistakenly deported to a prison in El Salvador.
A Maryland man who was mistakenly deported.
A Maryland man who was wrongly deported.
Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the Maryland man mistakenly deported to El Salvador.
That Maryland man that was detained.
Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the Maryland man mistakenly deported to a prison in El Salvador.
He was mistakenly sent to that prison.
They're not even trying to bring back a Maryland man who was mistakenly deported to El Salvador.
Because the ultimate reality is that under the current Trump administration, Kilmar Abrego Garcia was going to be deported because A, the courts found that he was in fact an MS-13 member, and B, MS-13 is now designated as a terror organization. And now that Abrego Garcia has been deported to El Salvador, he is in CCOP prison, along with tens of thousands of other street gang members from El Salvador. I mean, was El Salvador just supposed to let him back out on the street? Of course not. But instead of accurately describing who Kilmar Abrego Garcia is, the media had other plans.
Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the Maryland man.
Kilmar Abrego Garcia is a Maryland man.
Maryland man.
A Maryland man.
Maryland man.
Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the Maryland man.
A Maryland man.
Maryland man.
The Maryland man.
The Maryland man they shipped to El Salvador.
The Maryland man who was sent to El Salvador.
This man from Maryland who was deported to an El Salvador prison.
Only the left-wing media could call an alleged gang member living in the U.S. illegally a Maryland man.
A Maryland man, the case of a Maryland man.
A Maryland man.
Maryland man.
Maryland man.
Maryland man.
That Maryland man.
The case of the Maryland man.
Maryland man.
Kilmar Abrego Garcia, that's a Maryland man.
The Maryland man.
This Maryland man.
The Maryland man.
The Maryland man.
He had no intent of returning the Maryland man.
A wrongly deported man, Maryland man, I should say.
And not only is Kilmar Abrego Garcia a Maryland man, but he's also a Maryland father.
Where is he? A judge asking the DOJ for the whereabouts of the Maryland father they mistakenly deported.
Is Kilmar Abrego Garcia an MS-13 gang member, as the government alleges, or a father, a loving father, as his lawyer has talked about?
The sheer lawlessness of Trump's illegal deportations and refusal to bring a Maryland father home to his family.
Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a Maryland father.
Kilmar Armando Abrego Garcia, that's the Maryland father.
Maryland father who had been deported.
There's this young man from Maryland, a father.
But it turns out that the wife of this Maryland father would allege in her own handwriting that her husband had beaten the crap out of her on a regular basis. And she would eventually file 2 temporary protective orders against Abrego Garcia. It was then revealed by the Tennessee Star that Maryland father was detained in a 2022 traffic stop on suspicion of human trafficking. And Just the News reported that the Biden administration flagged Abrego Garcia as an illegal alien suspected of human smuggling. Homeland Security would then release this Combined Intelligence Unit investigative referral report, where it was noted that along with Maryland Dad, there were 8 other individuals in the vehicle with him. He claimed that he was driving from Houston, Texas to Temple Hills, Maryland to bring in people to perform construction work. There was no luggage in the vehicle, and all of the passengers gave the same home address as Abrego Garcia's home address. But nothing to see here, guys. He's just a Maryland father.
Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a Maryland father who came here at age 16.
Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a Maryland father.
Maryland father.
Maryland father.
Mistakenly deported father. The Maryland father mistakenly deported.
The Maryland father who was wrongfully deported.
Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the Maryland father.
The father of 3 deported to a mega prison in El Salvador.
Father from Maryland.
Maryland father.
This Maryland father who was wrongly deported.
Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the Maryland dad.
The Maryland father mistakenly deported.
The Maryland father.
This Maryland father.
That Maryland father.
The Maryland husband and father.
A 29-year-old father of 3.
Now, in very rare cases, someone in the media would be honest.
It's been more than 1 month since an undocumented immigrant from El Salvador was arrested in Maryland and sent to a supermax prison in his home country.
The Trump administration is asking the Supreme Court to block a judge's order to bring back a Salvadorian man it admits was mistakenly deported to a prison in his home country.
Great job, CNN's Manu Raju. Way to be objective.
This case involving this Maryland man.
On April 4th, U.S. District Judge Paula Zinnes ordered the United States government to facilitate and effectuate Kilmar Abrego Garcia's return. However, on April 10th, the Supreme Court, in a 9-0 decision, only granted that the United States facilitate his return, but not effectuate it, writing that the intended scope of the term effectuate in the district court's order is, however, unclear and may exceed the district court's authority. The district court should clarify its directive with due regard for the deference owed to the executive branch in the conduct of foreign affairs. Facilitate means to make an action or process easy or easier. Effectuate means to put into force or operation. And because Abrego Garcia is a Salvadorian national in the custody of El Salvador, we can no longer effectuate his return.
That's up to El Salvador if they want to return him. That's not up to us. The Supreme Court ruled, President, that if, as El Salvador wants to return him, this is international matters, foreign affairs, if they wanted to return him, we would facilitate it, meaning provide a plane.
They did not order the administration to return him to the United States. They said that they need to facilitate this return. They could have said, we order him returned, but they didn't do that. So you heard the Attorney General. She was being very careful in the Oval Office. When she was asked, would you help? She says, of course we'd provide a plane, right? Thereby facilitating whatever El Salvador is doing. The Supreme Court appeared to defer to the executive branch, given that this is an international matter. And you see, yes, it does look a little bit like a semantic game, but they are playing within the bounds of what the Supreme Court ruled.
So while the district court is scrambling to change the definition of the word effectuate, Senator Chris Van Hollen, a Maryland man himself, decided to take a likely taxpayer-funded trip to El Salvador.
I do intend to go to El Salvador to discuss the release of this individual who is illegally detained. A Maryland man who's the father of 3 in a notorious prison in El Salvador. It is absolutely unjust and illegal to have this Marylander detained one more day in a notorious prison in El Salvador.
I'm here at the airport. I'm about to board my flight for San Salvador. The goal of this mission is to let the Trump administration, to let the government of El Salvador know that we are going to keep fighting to bring Abrego Garcia home.
I just landed at the airport in San Salvador a little while ago. The goal of my visit is to talk to people here about the release of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. I told his wife and his family I would do everything possible to bring him home. These soldiers were ordered to prevent us from going any farther from this spot. I understand we're about 3 kilometers now from CCOT, and as you can see, they're letting other cars go by, but they stopped us because they're under orders not to allow us to proceed.
But then, when it seemed that all hope was lost, a miracle happened. The president of El Salvador, Nayib Bukele, posted images of Senator Van Hollen on X, writing that Kilmar Abrego Garcia, miraculously risen from the death camps and torture, now sipping margaritas with Senator Van Hollen in the tropical paradise of El Salvador. He would then post, now that Abrego Garcia has been confirmed healthy, he gets the honor of staying in El Salvador's custody. Senator Van Hollen would then post this picture of his meeting with an MS-13 gang member and alleged human trafficker who beat the hell out of his wife. An image that will now be used by the Republicans throughout the midterms and the 2028 election cycle.
Congratulations, you played yourself.
And on that note, that's it for now. Please check out these videos that you may have missed. And as always, thanks for tuning in, and I hope to see you next time, if there is next time.